Hello, everybody. This is Scott Palmer, Executive Officer of the Builders and Remodelers Association of Greater Boston. Welcome to our Wednesday webinar. We have a nice presentation today. I will say we are recording this. I will share the link to the recording after the meeting in case you want to get a copy of it. So look for that. It's great to have these webinars, although we're getting pretty excited about our live events that we're scheduling, including the June 9th golf outing. And also that's the evening of the annual banquet, which is a statewide annual banquet. If you're not a golfer, certainly consider coming to Pine Hills and Plymouth for the annual banquet. It'll be a statewide gathering. And we have Secretary Keneally doing a keynote presentation. We have the installation of the state officers, and it'll be a nice night out at a really nice venue. And if you do golf, certainly playing the Nicklaus course at Pine Hills is a real joy. So enough of that plug. I will say if you have any questions, you can either send them through chat to me, and I'll ask Janice the question, or at the end of the meeting, we will be more than happy to open up the audio so you can ask the question. We do keep the video off, so it's not a distraction at all. So that's why you keep seeing your video turned off if you have it on. And of course, anytime you have anything you want to ask me, privately text it or chat it or call me up later, and I'll be glad to over it. So with that, I'd like to introduce Janice DiPietro. She's the founder and chief executive officer of Bragby member Exceptional Leaders International. I had the pleasure of meeting Janice and her coworker, John Kearney, about a year ago, and they do some really nice high-level executive work in the area. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Janice, who's going to grab the screen, and she'll be off and running. Thank you all.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate, and my partner, John Kearney, is also attending today as well. And many of you may have met John over the years. So it's a pleasure for us to be with you today to talk a little bit about certainly, the last year under COVID and what we're seeing and experiencing and working with our clients across really across your sectors as well. So let me go ahead and kind of pull up the presentation deck, which I believe the recording will be available, and certainly you have my contact information, so happy to share. So what we've seen, if we just take a minute and step back and look at where the COVID-19 impact has really been really across sectors, but particularly in the builders, remodelers, and construction space in general, and the service groups that support them, has really been in four areas. It's been in the area of leadership, market opportunities and buying patterns, financial implications, to say the least, and then just the entire world of work. So I thought we could begin by talking a little bit about each of those areas, and then move into kind of where do we go from here. So, across the board at every one of our client situations, I can best describe that the leadership teams are feeling, in many ways, quite exhausted by what's transpired, and having to really, if you think about it, for many of us, when you're in leadership, you're quite used to having the right answer, or at least feeling pretty confident in our answers based on our experience, et cetera. During COVID, things were changing so rapidly, and there were just so many unknowns that regardless of what role you had in an organization or how long you'd been in a given industry sector, we didn't necessarily know the right answer. We were able to communicate what we thought was best or what we knew at the time. So in many cases, it's been quite humbling. Certainly our agility has been tested, and that's one of the positives I think that we'll be able to take from this experience, is that, there's been a lot discussed over the last 10 years about agile organizations and being sure you could be flexible. And in many cases, the last year plus kind of forced us into being kind of agile on an ongoing basis. As much as I've mentioned this kind of exhaustion that set in across leadership teams, I will tell you that people are feeling, great pride in surviving. It may not be great even today, or even good, but there's a sense that the worst is hopefully behind us. Anytime you face a time of adversity, often people either rise or fall to the occasion. And I think for many leaders, it's been a time where they've had team members that have really stepped up and been able to work alongside the founders and CEOs in a very positive way. And in other cases, team members who just couldn't get there or found it just so overly disruptive that their competency levels kind of dropped. And again, it will be important as we talk about the go forward. And then you're going to hear these two phrases over and over again from me today, which is the importance of communication, the old adage that, you can say something, multiple times. I guess it's 7 now plus before people really hear you, and it feels like, you're repeating the same things. But the reality is it's been a time for incredible levels of communication and incredible levels of empathy. And those remain as we move forward. Before we talk about kind of the marketing and market and general buying pattern changes, I just wanted to share one piece of data from McKinsey that this won't surprise you, which has really just been the way in which people think about buying and engaging in the marketplace. And that's obviously around digitalization, e-commerce. And people now, the quote that's before you, people who are using digital channels, either to find you through whether it's social media or websites, or that are thinking about how they're going to buy, review of products. We have clients that now, used to be out in the field, with a lot of customer interaction prior to a sale occurring and helping them to walk through selections, having totally moved on a necessity during COVID to online. And that for many people, they've gotten so accustomed to it that is likely to be where they'll continue. So again, an important factor as we go forward. So I know that our membership at Gregory, is really those both in the residential and in the commercial, as well as obviously in a host of service providers as well. There's been some good news, bad news here, right? So those in the resi side, the residential side, although we had certainly disruptions in terms of being able to get access to customers and being able to do work, we do know that the whole home and personal comfort space has really become paramount because people were spending so much more time at home, their home environments, that things that they may have put off for an extended period of time have risen to a higher level of importance to them. In addition, the idea, and we'll talk about it in a minute, that people may continue to work from home or continue to have home as their kind of central base is likely to continue for some time. On the commercial side, a little bit of a different story, right? So we saw a lot of commercial projects being stalled, being canceled. What's interesting is the data suggests that the residential market, broadly defined, by March of 2021 came back to pre-pandemic levels. Non-resi back in the commercial side of the house, so to speak, even by March of 2021, most recently, is only at about 51% of the peak. So when we talk to architectural firms in our client base, they're beginning to see their backlog increase, and so projects that were put on hold beginning to be released. So the good news there is that although that's often, the architectural side is often a lagging indicator, but it's positive. I mentioned the McKinsey quote. So how people are making buy decisions what they're buying, where they're buying it, and how they connect has really changed. And as we've all learned, that the way that we operated, for example, if it was non-digital or in the field, those patterns during COVID were not necessarily as successful as they've been in the past, if they were even possible. And so the question that we'll all have now is, what will the normal be moving forward? What is this norm likely to look like? Profitability, and we're going to talk a lot about this, and my partner John is on the line as a financial expert. We'll share that certainly there was a negative impact for many, not all. Some businesses actually saw increases in their revenues and profitability last year, but that was a smaller subset, certainly. There was a reasonable flow of whether it was PPP funds or EIDL loans, but government funding for many businesses was available, covered payroll and other expenses, and that certainly was wonderful and great all around. But we don't want that to have really kind of overshadowed the realities of the business moving forward, and certainly where we'll focus attention. So my hope is that for many of us, our line of business and product profitability analysis was completed. If you didn't look at that level of detail, now's absolutely a time to do so, because we're going to find, again, with this idea of market changes, that things that we may have thought were going to work for us didn't. Certainly relationships have been tested, relationships across the board, both personally and professionally, but certainly on the professional side, the relationships with lenders, we may have had difficulties around covenant requirements, investor expectations. If you have outside funding, that was certainly tested as well. Family dynamics, if you're a family-owned business or family-managed business, expectations around family members. We do a lot of work in the closely held family space, and expectations across members often weren't aligned in terms of what was happening during COVID. All of these, I think, and again, this common theme of communication during COVID, and as we come out, there wasn't a usual pattern of behavior. There wasn't a usual ability to do any of our high-level kind of forecasting, et cetera. Everything became much more difficult. So I think keeping these critical parties informed, both during this and now, in terms of what our plans are, even if those are, here's what we're thinking, here's where our current path forward is, and we'll keep you informed as things evolve. Critically important, both then and now. Probably in no greater area did things change than the world of work, how people think about work, where they're working, how they're working. And so, this idea of working remotely, we have clients that a remote workforce was just not in the cards at all, not something culturally that they were accepting of. And then, within literally days, all personnel that could be remote were remote. So that remains kind of a critical factor as we think about the movement ahead. For those of us in the construction field, and many others, but particularly in construction, we had this very kind of natural division that occurred, right? Because if we were continuing to provide our services as essential workers in many areas, our crews, our in the field professionals were working throughout this time and did not have the luxury of saying, I'm gonna work from home today. Pretty tough to be constructing sitting at a home desk. But our office staff was able to do that. So there in many of our client situations, we're helping them to deal with this kind of feeling of a division between various groups within the companies. For those employees who have been able to work from home and have been out of an office setting for an extended period of time, their kind of work community changed to the kind of family, cultural connections they were making at work, to now really forming those connections or enhancing those connections with neighbors and family members, because that became the communities in which they were surrounded by. And that's going to impact how people think about coming back. And certainly during a time when we were facing such an incredible health crisis, when our schools were closed, priorities were modified by folks who were really focused, and had to be, on their own health, the health of their family, the education of their children. And so although we're critically important in terms of how we think about our livelihoods, on the other hand, when health and family are at the forefront of our concerns, and our children certainly took a lower priority. So, in the computer-based office arena, the thought is that 70% of what people are doing can be done off-site without losing effectiveness. There are others, I just mentioned, where our construction teams, for example, can't be done remotely. So there's kind of that 0%. But the 70% is pretty interesting to think about your plans as you reopen your work sites. So, here we are, this kind of wonderful moment in time where we're seeing here in Massachusetts in particular, our state reopening, mask wearing going down, vaccination rates up, cases way down, all wonderful news. However, on the business side, we're facing what we're labeling kind of a post-COVID rumble, which is just at the time when people really want to hit the gas, get things back moving. There's been all kinds of obstacles that have arisen over the last several months, in part due to COVID, but in part due to a host of other economic and world events that I thought we should spend a few minutes kind of talking through. And again, in your business, you're really living this every day. So supply chains have been disrupted. So obtaining products has become incredibly difficult, and I'm sure you're all facing this. Prices have been, and I'm going to show you a graph in a moment, prices have been accelerating at kind of crazy rates. So it becomes incredibly difficult to commit to pricing to a customer base. When can we actually get out and service them? What's the pricing going to look like? What kind of inventory levels do we now need to maintain in order to keep our business flowing? And so coming up with alternative strategies to what we may have done in the past is becoming a necessity. We have the transportation sector that's also been disrupted. So we have lead times increasing. So when we can get the product, you can't get it with the same frequency that you once did. So being able to say, well, my backlog is X and I'm beginning this project in 60 days, so I don't have to bring in product until, almost just in time or a week or two before that, that's going out the window. And we're seeing lead times accelerating multiple times over. So what do we do? What are we advising, and what are we assisting our clients in helping them do? So a few things. Obviously, trying to lock in clients for the future, even though we may not be able to service them today, but not losing that business opportunity. And so having them contracted so that when we can be out in the field, we are. And so they've chosen us, not one of our competitors. Having pricing that has caveats that says, there may be a surcharge necessary based on current events. I mean, don't have to go far, but to turn on the news or read a newspaper to recognize that these kind of supply chain disruptions are affecting everyone. Do clients want to hear that? Of course not. Are they negotiating points? Of course. But certainly, instead of looking at a direct price increase, saying to clients, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to service you and try to hold prices for as long as I can, but I'm not controlling that. So, I'm going to need you to support us during this time, and we'll do the best we can. Labor force incredibly disruptive. It is in my opinion, in the opinion of my colleagues at ELI, the number one risk factor, not only in the construction and building and design sector, but really across literally every industry sector that we work with. The availability of talent is preventing businesses from really moving forward. So we have any number of factors that continue to come into play. Some of it is people just getting comfortable with coming back out and into the workforce. Folks addressing other personal issues that still exist for them, whether it's children not in full-time school or parental, other medical issues facing people that are preventing them. And some would argue some of the current stimulus for unemployment and other government programs have been hurting this as well. But in any case, we have a disrupted labor force. I'm going to talk more about this in a minute. And we've got an exhausted leadership team. And now, so here we are facing this COVID rumble. And so new leadership challenges kind of hitting us literally on a daily basis. I was speaking to one of our CEOs yesterday, and she shared with me, and we're helping them through a number of things. And she shared, Janice, I'm just exhausted. I just feel like I've made it through, one tsunami, and now I'm getting hit again. And her business is facing all of the comments I just mentioned to you. And so we're now, working through each of those in time. But here are some of the material price changes and kind of a few areas that I thought would be interesting to this group. And virtually we could put up another 25 different products here, and the trend lines would be pretty much the same. It's just, what's the pitch of the line? So incredible supply chain disruption and incredible material price changes. So, that was uplifting, correct, in terms of all the kind of, heaviness that we've all kind of lived through and the changes that have occurred. So, I really wanted to focus on, so what now, right? What are the things that, given some suggestions along the way here, but so how do we plan? How do we move forward? And where should we be focusing time, energy, dollars? So let me take you through what we're advising clients, what we're seeing is working in the marketplace as we come out of this last year. First and foremost, and it kind of always starts here, re-examine and realign your strategy, right? Have the conversation with your leadership team about the market forces, the buying patterns. What do we feel have, whether it's permanently changed or changed for the foreseeable future? And what are we doing to respond to those? What do we have to continue to do to respond to those? What new processes may we need to put into play? How can we capitalize upon these changes? Not all of what's happened has been bad, correct? I mean, we have a client that's in the alternative energy space, so basically in the construction space. And for them, one of the things that they've been able to do is, because clients are so comfortable with planning their installation and what they're looking for and what their expectations are through a digital interface, we've been able to kind of shorten the time period to project launch. And so that's been good. Now, with markets reopening, they can offer to clients both alternatives. Some people want to stay digital, others really are embracing the opportunity to have a company representative meet with them in person, see their home, etc. So that's been something that this particular entity is looking at, maintaining both channels to meet the market demand. And we also advise that you take a step back or you work with an external party to really look at your strategy and look at, so what's going to differentiate you going forward? There may have been certain attributes that led to your success up to 2020, but now as we are well into 21 and think about the future, what are those differentiating factors for you moving forward? Have those changed, and how do you be sure that the market understands how you compare to your competition? Re-examining and realigning your strategy is paramount, but it's the beginning, right? So now it's, how do you get your team aligned to that strategic approach? How do you communicate? How do you address questions and concerns? Again, people have just come out of this incredibly turbulent, lots of change happening, and you may be, after having gone through this strategic review, advising that more change is on the horizon, and that's not always, as human beings, that's not where our comfort spot really lies. We like to see things kind of continue to be in a consistent manner. So this is not easy, and one that, again, communications, soliciting input, answering questions will be very, very important. It probably won't surprise you when we talk about the labor shortage, that re-engaging your team is going to be critically important. Right now, employee retention is paramount. It's been amazing to watch regardless of role, whether it's looking for an engineer, an electrician, or a project manager, or a senior level executive in an operating role. The ability to attract talent has been extremely difficult simply because the supply is so limited. So in that type of a market environment, we always, this is true all the time, but more so now, being sure that you, one, have identified your top performers, that you can look across your team and say, Bob and Sally are incredibly valuable to this organization. They have skill sets and experiences that would be incredibly difficult to replicate. Being sure that you understand where both of those individuals are in terms of being content with the organization, being satisfied, because I can tell you that there's a very high probability that they are receiving phone calls on a daily basis from your competitors and from others in the market, kind of wooing them to join a different environment. The one thing that employers have going for them right now is that there's a subset of the employee base that is fearful about making a move until things have settled down a little bit more. So kind of the devil you know is better than the one you don't. During a time of unrest is still somewhat holding people back, but less and less so. So understanding what motivates your people. It's been lots of research that's shown, particularly when people get to a higher compensation level, 75,000 and above in particular, it's not all about the money. It's about a host of other things. Is the culture an environment I want to work in? Do I enjoy, and is there high quality of work? Do I have job satisfaction? Am I enjoying and getting direction from my manager? Are people empathetic about my life? And my second bullet here, is my employer willing to be flexible, recognizing that I am still dealing with some concerns either on the home front or whatever it may be, and so I need a higher level of flexibility. So we are encouraging our clients to be highly flexible, to think about perhaps a hybrid work model where employees who are spending maybe some subset of the week working at home, some subset in the office. I'm going to talk a minute about what that means from a leadership standpoint, because that really starts increasing the requirements on accountability and the like as well. Retraining may be necessary. As we're looking at the number of the way in which your business is changing and morphing, you may need to have a retraining of the people that you have in different areas. So a focus on really developing as a learning organization, being able to provide that career advancement and professional development is going to be critical. And a word that, probably not one of my strongest suits, but you need to be patient in terms of allowing people the time and providing them the guidance in order to continue to expand their roles within the organization and to retool if that's needed. As much as you need to be patient with others, you need to be patient with yourself, right? Because again, as leaders, we're all kind of coming off of this very heavy time. But people are going to be looking to us to re-energize and to feel about this ability to rebuild, to position ourselves for continued growth in the years ahead. So the ability for your team or to have others supporting you on the training and development of your workforce is going to be critical. And having managers who are coaches, right, who can help the team to develop is critically important, to be mentors. By the same token, if you're going to have a more flexible workforce, if you're going to allow people to continue to work from home, the issue around accountability is key. So having the right teams for the desired outcomes is critically important. Always has been, but now where you're fine-tuning strategy, you're probably going to be able to do a limited number of things with a limited team. You got to be sure that they're the right team for the right at the right moment of time. And you're probably, like most organizations right now, whether it's because of the staff limitations available to you, but everyone's doing more with less. And there can be a tendency to say, well, we've gotten this far with this staff level. Let's continue to do that. We've continued to have our leaders work in multiple areas and not only lead, but do. And isn't that great what we've been able to accomplish? In many cases, it is. And it means that you don't go back necessarily to the same levels. However, watch burnout, right? Don't have expectations so high that people just are burning out and are going to lose any level of productivity that you may have expected. So financial performance, right? One of the key areas impacted by COVID now as we go into this post-COVID environment, including this COVID rumble. There's a few things that we absolutely advise that you do. And again, my partner, John's kind of an expert on these. Build a financial model, have a financial budget and plan that's in alignment with your current business focus. We know, for example, when we were talking about your supply chain, increasing costs, increasing lead times, that you may, for example, have heavier inventory requirements. You may have to re-examine your pricing. We need to understand what is the impact on cash flow, for example, by doing all of that. So if you don't have a 13-week cash flow or you haven't been thinking about that type of detailed financial analysis, you need it, particularly during these uncertain times and the fact that things are just going to continue to evolve and change. Have to keep your lenders and investors well informed. Nobody likes a surprise. No one likes to believe that, if they have banked you, that you come out of the woods, that you're going to hit the covenants, everything is going to be on track, and then to learn post the fact that you weren't. So I think that there is a much more compassion may not be the right word, but much more willingness to be open to clients' needs, both by the lending community and by the investor community, when they understand the why we're where we are and what are we going to do going forward. So the planning and here are the assumptions we're making, here are how things could play out or change, very important. If you received government financing through the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP, be sure forgiveness is secured or that you have a path for forgiveness as soon as possible. So as soon as you've met the requirements, file those applications. Some lenders for PPP2 are still not accepting, but that should be opening up momentarily. So, get your paperwork in order, get ready to file that. Let's get those loans off your balance sheet, because you may be looking, as my last bullet suggests, for additional opportunities and additional leverage. And so having the forgiveness behind you, critically important to do. So the road ahead. So I've spent a lot of time on some of the negative consequences of COVID, the fact that we're in this kind of rumble period where there's a lot of moving parts, for many of us not necessarily in a positive direction. There's a workforce shortage. Get creative around your retention and recruiting efforts. Seek outside support. I have a client, for example, that we are using all new channels to recruit talent. We are building internal capabilities. So this is in the electrical field. And I can tell you that there's going to be a supply and demand issue for electricians for years to come. And so we're working very hard to develop our own kind of training programs for our particular industry sector, and to be able to bring people through as quickly as possible. So that's really where we're going. So that creativity, that support from experts in these fields. On the other hand, when we look at kind of construction, and again, our organization is made up of folks in a lot of different areas, so I'm spreading the peanut butter here. But if we look at general construction backlogs, some things are happening, right? Which is projects are coming off hold. Resi market, I already mentioned, is back in earnest. Commercial freeing up. People have dollars to spend, and so there is availability of capital. And so not only is the backlog freeing up and people taking the hold off their projects, but backlog in new projects is really starting to accelerate in the early part of January, February, and now is continuing as we come into the spring. So the good news is, and in fact, I've read a number of articles and spoken to a number of folks who have said, we think that we're going to have an incredible boom economy coming up. And of course, some concerns around inflation, but this incredible boom economy, and that this may in fact become a decade of expansion. So good news is that the trends are in the right line. This COVID rumble may be with us for a few months, but I think that too will settle down. I think really some really positive years ahead for the sector. So with that, I've pretty much taken us almost exactly to the wire here time-wise, but if there are any questions, comments, I'm really happy to answer pretty much everything.
That was great, actually. So thank you for doing that. I have one question in particular. I've been looking at supply chain because it's a problem that everyone's having in the industry, whether it's just the escalating cost of softwood because of demand issues, or the supply chain going back to the very beginning in the plastics and vinyl industries. Do you see any end to this problem, shortening these supply chains and getting what I would call a return to some normalcy within cost and time?
We do. I mean, I don't think we'll necessarily see what we've had in the past. So I think some element of both the extended supply lead times and increased prices will exist, but nothing like the kind of acceleration we're seeing right now. I think what ended up happening is that we ended up with folks not purchasing for an extended period of time and kind of living off of what they had, correct? And then, in many cases, the floodgates began to open, and the suppliers themselves didn't have the raw materials, didn't have the labor force. And then, of course, we've had some horrific kind of world events that, from a transportation standpoint, just clogged things even further. So, I kind of think it's, like the mouse through the snake, right? I think we're in this kind of bubble period that has just, made everything pretty negative. But I do think that will turn around over time, and relatively soon. The labor market's the biggest concern in terms of just finding talent to be able to execute through.
So Larry Cady from Northeast Builders Association. Hi, Larry. He's asking a question about family business dynamics. So with a turn in the business and succession from dad to family kind of situation, what are your thoughts on that? And there's a couple of Cadys on the call, so be careful.
That's all good. Larry, thanks for asking the question. I mean, it's one of the, as you mentioned, it's really one of our focus areas is in family business. So what we've seen happening with a number of our clients, there had been a plan for succession to occur, or at least discussions had begun at a moment in time prior to COVID. And then, of course, things were pretty much put on hold. No work had occurred. And so if there was planning, it stopped. If there was no plan, then we were in discussions to say it's kind of like building a home, right? You have to have a plan. Otherwise, the expectations are likely to not be met pretty much for everybody. So if there isn't a plan, my recommendation is, and it's not because we do this, but is to really sit down with an advisor who helps family businesses through the planning process, and can do it candidly in an impartial way, right? Because when you're dealing with multi-generations, you have people at different points in their life wanting different things, and things can become emotional and personal because this is a very emotional and personal transition. So having someone to kind of help coach you through. There are best practices on how to go through a family succession. We've helped many businesses to do it successfully. I have some horrific stories for you of things that didn't. And I would suggest now, as you're thinking about planning for this kind of post-COVID era, is an ideal time to also sit down and think about what succession is going to look like. But it really needs to be mapped out. How are we going to transact it? What's the timeline? What do folks hope to accomplish? What do things look like going forward? What are the role? What is the, what might your dad be transitioning to, right? So if the former operator is stepping out of that role, what will their role be? For some, it's I'm going to go do nonprofit stuff. I'm going to go play golf. For others, it's I want to stay involved in the business at some level. What does that mean for next gens that are staying in the business? Every situation, I can tell you, every family business situation is a little bit different. But I send out my email and phone number. I'm happy to just get on a phone call, answer any questions more specifically, and if I can be helpful in any way. But do know that having a plan is kind of the step one. And I can tell you, having been on the other end, I grew up in a family business. ELI is a family business. That without the plan, it's really difficult to be successful. Just being honest.
Thank you. I had a witty friend from Maine that used to say on business transactions, treat them like family or even better.
That's right. Well, it's interesting, and I think Scott, we even talked about. I mean, we can do another presentation on this, but a number of folks that were thinking about succession or thinking about a potential transaction, a lot of that got put on hold over the last 18 months or so, and so we're seeing the market heating back up, and the question is, when's the right timing for that, particularly if you're looking at it at a sale
Yeah.
transaction. So
Another question about anything you're seeing in the labor force. Obviously, in the trades, there's been a big gap in enough people coming into the trades to support the industry in total.
Yep.
Bragby does its part to try to increase the number of people getting interested in entering the trades, and it's an ongoing thing that we have to do because we see, electricians, plumbers, carpenters just leaving, and massive numbers are aging out.
Yep.
Do you see any indication that some of these folks that have been in the what I would call the general services industries coming in and saying, maybe I don't want to be a barista any longer, maybe I'll do something else? Is there maybe a chance to create more opportunities for them to learn how to be tradespeople?
I think you've just hit on it. I think that there's still, remember for many years it was, the point for folks was go to high school, then go on to college, and go off and move into one of the business professions or medical or legal, and that was the path, right? And the trade schools for many years saw a decline in enrollments, et cetera. And in part, that's why we are where we are, right? Because you've got an aging workforce and you have huge demands. And we didn't get into this, but recognition that we have a Congress and president that is supporting infrastructure build, et cetera. So the demand in the sector are only going to increase. And so what can we do? I think that there needs to be an educational movement that starts back in high school, because young people don't recognize the opportunities, one, that exists for them in the trades. And I believe there's a complete misconception of the economics of coming into the trades, right? And what that looks like in the long-term career path that people can create. And so I think we have to start there. I think we have to continue to support the technical schools and be talking to students early on. We have to have internship programs and give apprenticeship programs and give people an opportunity to come in, and not just to see the kind of base level work that's involved, but at least through on-the-job experiences, showing them what the work of a master electrician or an electrician looks like, or a high-end carpenter, and the value of the work that they're doing, so they can aspire to that. I really just think there's been such an incredible lack of education on what's possible. And so I think we all of us that are in this sector have to be committed to further exposure and putting programs in place. The internal training, I think, is going to be critically important. The market is so competitive that you can't just go off and say, I'll go hire someone from XYZ. It doesn't work. Everybody's facing the same supply shortage. So those are some of the things. I think it will change. Unfortunately, none of this happens overnight, and that's a bit of the problem. I wish we had.
Yeah, and I agree with you that we have to go into really very young people and even the middle school level,
Yep.
and not only convince them about the opportunity in the trades, but to convince their parents.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the comment that was just made in the chat is as well. Absolutely right. Parents, particularly, again, if you think about just generationally, right? So parents who are in their, maybe in their 30s and 40s, they grew up at a time when the path was, go to high school, go on to college, right? Traditional college route. And so for many of them, they're thinking the same thing for their own children, sometimes regardless of where their aptitude lies, right? So I think your point even back into the middle school. And some of the advantages we have is that the trades can be presented in a pretty cool way, right? In terms of what you get to work with and what you build, and recognizing and that there is a subset of folks that that's their natural competency. They're great with their hands. They're creative. There's a host of things that they're interested in. So tapping them early, I agree. But the parents are a critical factor in changing their mindset. I think people just don't recognize what the opportunity truly is.
Right. And I'd like to point out that Larry and I, great minds think alike. So thank you, Larry. Yeah, and certainly when I'm in the schools talking about the programs, I mention the fact that I don't talk about the trades in general. I talk about the building science of being in the trades, because it takes, I mean, they like to hear the word STEM in all,
Yep.
you know, all the programs. Well, you have to have science, technology, you know, math, you have to have engineering and math, you have to have that in building today. I mean, you always did, really. So it really resonates well when you come in with that point of view. So
Yeah.
that's what needs to be done, you know, more.
I think that's right. I mean, I think the link, I mean, think about the way that we work in the trades today in terms of the impact technology has had, right? So, you know, someone who's, you know, particularly interested in kind of the videos in social media. I mean, we're doing that every day, right? It's how we communicate
Right.
with our customers. It's how we're reading blueprints. It's so I think again that can get lost because some folks think of what the trades were 40, 50 years ago, right? Before that kind of incredible explosion on the technology side as well. So it's absolutely in alignment with, particularly again, thinking back with parents who say, you know, I want my child to go into one of the STEM fields. Well, that is what this is, right? It's hard to do what we do without that. Absolutely.
Exactly. Well, again, I thank you. Now, if anybody would like to, any other questions, we've covered chat. If anybody wants to unmute their phone or anything, you're more than welcome to and ask another question. And I will remind everyone that this will be recorded. I'll send it out to everybody that's here today, and you're more than welcome to share that out as you see. And of course, you can contact Janice if anybody needs her contact information. It is on that chat, but you can get it from me for sure, or through ELI themselves.
Great.
And with that, thank you, Janice. It's always a pleasure, and hope to see you actually in person again soon.
Same here, and thank you. We're very, very pleased to be members and appreciate this. And please don't hesitate, anyone, to reach out. And Scott, I don't know if you want to share the deck or anything at all. Just let me know, and we're happy to share that with our colleagues here.
Excellent. All right, everybody, have a great afternoon. Thank you for being here. Take care.
Bye-bye.